Alright guys, get ready for it. Today I'm going to reveal 4 amazing facts from my flat earth journey. But before we dive in, I'm going to give some personal background as to how I got on this flat earth journey. So about a week after Christmas, I came down with the flu. And I was laying on my couch, trying to get better, drinking some tea, watching videos from the dark corner of the internet. And out of this dark corner emerged a video series by Dean Odell on the North Pole and the tree at the North Pole, or whatever it's about. And look, I'm not going to play games. I mean, this was out there. This stuff was just wild conspiracy theory. This guy was saying that at the North Pole, there's like a vortex you can go down into Garden of Eden, and like Palladian Nordic people live there and have advanced technology and tractor beams, and they're monitoring human civilization, and they bring people in, and I don't even know what else. I mean, it's all this conspiracies, all these cover-ups, this and that. I don't even know where to start. I was watching this thing with my head sideways like a confused dog. What is this? I had seen a few of his lectures before, a few of his sermons, I should say, and I thought they were okay. And I think I had suspected that he was a flat earther, but this just goes to show that once you accept flat earth, you're basically going to accept everything. All right? Because the earth is a globe. Everyone has known that the earth is a globe for 2,300 years. And that's what I'm going to show later in the video. But it's also a good point about the fact that once you cross that threshold, all bets are off. I mean, what's this guy talking about? And then I checked his page even a week ago. We're in February now. And this guy's still making video after video after video about flat earth. And that's what I found out, is that once a person gets on this, it's like a drug. And it's just their whole life becomes about it. And then they want to preach that. That's like the new gospel. But anyway, back to the story. So I got sick, and I watched a couple hours of these videos like a confused dog with my head sideways, like, what the? Here's my position. If a Christian man of some reputation, a professed man of God, or people recognize him as a man of God, says, hey, look, this is important, you should look into it, I will look into it. Right? I'm not necessarily going to believe it, but I will look into it. So I said, okay, maybe this guy's going overboard, but maybe there's something here. Maybe there is something at the North Pole. I don't know. I don't know anything about it. I'm not a geologist. I'm not a geophysicist. And so I'm like, just trying to give this guy the benefit of the doubt, saying, well, maybe there's a little fire with just a lot of smoke. And what I found out is that there's nothing. I mean, the more you look into it, the more you see that it's just hearsay. It's just lies. All right, and we're going to get into that. I'm going to go into 4 amazing facts from my flat earth journey. And we're going to get into that in just a moment. But I think it's relevant to point this out, how I got started. And I make these videos primarily for Christians who are on the fence about this, because I know a lot of people have seen the videos and they get confused. I've talked with educated professional men who've seen flat earth videos and been like, I don't know, man, it's confusing. Like, why didn't they see the curvature? Maybe it is flat. Okay. That's primarily who I make my videos for. Unfortunately, I've never seen a dedicated flat earther realize that they're wrong. I think it could happen. And while I'm on this point, guys, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel. What happens is that sometimes I'll post these videos on flat earth videos, and then a bunch of flat earth trolls will come in and mass downvote my videos. And then what happens is it takes it off the page, because then the algorithm thinks that there's something wrong with my video. No, there's nothing wrong with my video. I research these, I put in time to these, and I hope that this provides useful information for you to help deprogram flat earthers, and I hope it helps people who are on the fence to really see there's no debate about this issue. Everyone has known that the earth is globe for 2,300 years, minimum, really 2,500 years plus. So I'm just telling the story of how I got started and with these Dean Odell videos. And I'm going to make some videos addressing some of his claims point by point. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I think it's a good case study of how once you cross this threshold, you're now in like Alice in Wonderland, and they can take you wherever they want to go, because it's really about hypnotic programming, disassociation. It's a type of cult. And look, I don't know Dean Odell. I'm not judging him. I have no idea what's going on with him. All I'm saying, it's just like Rob Skiba. Once you cross that threshold, it's like the ministry just becomes a flat earth ministry. You know, Rob Skiba passed away. You go to Rob Skiba's channel, and I mean, I don't know going back how far. I didn't study it or look at it in detail. But from what I can tell, the last few years of this guy's life, he was dedicated to flat earth. And what must that be like? I mean, assuming this guy's sincere, because I have a lot of doubts about this guy. I have a lot of questions about Rob Skiba, but I'm not going to go into that. Let's just take it at face value. So the point is, that's how I got on the flat earth journey. Being sick and coming across Dean Odell's totally out there, unbelievable nonsense about the North Pole, the flat earth, the Palladian Nordic people in the Garden of Eden in the basement of the North Pole. Since then, I've been doing a little more research when I get time, and I've been learning more. And the incredible thing is that the more I learn, the more it's obvious that flat earth is a hoax. You see that? The more I already knew that the earth was globe, but then the more I research it, the more obvious it becomes. And so today what we're going to cover is the history of the globe earth in Christendom. What have Christians believed for the past 2,000 years about the shape of the earth? And what I'm going to demonstrate on the back of other scholars is that they've all believed in a globe earth. So without further ado, I present 4 amazing facts from my flat earth journey. What I want to talk about today are 4 myths that I've discovered. There's really 3 myths and then 1 fact that's very important. The first myth is that when Columbus sailed, Europeans thought that the earth was flat. This is called like the flat earth lie. And just for context, I've been reading a book, among other research I've done, called Inventing the Flat Earth, Columbus and Modern Historians by Jeffrey Burton Russell. Now, I strongly recommend this book if you're a flat earther or you're kind of on the fence, or if you're a globe earther. This guy is a PhD professor out of the UC University system in California. I forget, it says University of California, Santa Barbara. And I mean, those are not Christian schools. The C stands for California, not Christianity. All right. And I don't know much about this guy. He's probably a Christian, just based off of his book. But this book is from 1992. And in it, he goes through the fact that this whole claim that people believed in a flat earth in the Middle Ages is a myth. And that's the number one point that I'm beginning with, is it all starts with Columbus. We're taught, in elementary school that everyone thought the earth was flat and said, oh no, you can't go sailing out there. You'll fall off the edge of the earth. And then he said, no, I've read the ancient books of Aristotle and I know the secret diameter of the earth and I'm going to sail around it and prove you all wrong. All right. That's not what happened. That's not even close to what happened. Columbus was an ambitious explorer and a tradesman who wanted to become famous and make money by circumnavigating the globe. He was right. He did think there was a globe. The issue was everyone else knew there was a globe. The only debate was how big was the globe. And people had very good estimates of that. People had very good estimates at that time of the approximate shape of the globe. And the basic argument against Columbus was the ocean's too big, you won't make it. Columbus fudged the numbers and was off by a factor of 5 about the actual shape of the globe, and he just got lucky and ran into the Americas. Now, there were other issues involved. I'm not going to get into it at all. But we have Columbus's diaries. We have other accounts from people at that time. Nobody challenged him. There's no record of anybody in authority challenging him on the basis of the fact that the earth was actually flat and that sailing around it was impossible. And of course, it's still possible to sail around the globe even if it were flat. But I'm saying that story is totally false. All right. When Columbus sailed, educated Europeans already knew that the earth was a globe. The number 2 myth I found out about was that all leading Christian scholars that we have records for, that are very good records going back to around 300, 400 AD, all leading Christian scholars have agreed that the globe is round or a sphere. There were Christian texts like on the sphere where they were talking about even the rotation of the earth long before Copernicus. Right. There is overwhelming evidence that all of Christendom, with very few exceptions, by very minor figures who were soundly ridiculed and derided, that everyone believed that the globe was round. I'm going to give you a few names and we'll dive into this later in more detail. This list includes St. Augustine, Basil of Caesarea, Marcianus Capella, Isidore of Seville. Isidore of Seville wrote arguably the first encyclopedia the world has ever seen, and he summarized essentially all human knowledge at the time. His encyclopedia was world famous. This guy was in 500, right around 500 to 600 AD. And he gave an estimate of the Earth's circumference. And he said that the Earth was round. Scholars agree that this guy believed in globe Earth. We have Sacrobosco. We have John Mandeville, who's actually a fictional person, but there's a book by him about his travels, even though it's a nom de plume, as they say. And he talked about how the Earth was globe. We have Nicole Oresme. We have Jean Buridan. We have Roger Bacon. We have major Christian scholars from about 400 AD to about 1300 AD, where I gave a figure from once every couple hundred years, where these were major Christian scholars who argued that the earth was globe. Now, I didn't even put in Dante there. Dante is another one from 1300 who believed that the globe was an earth. In one of his poems, he gave an estimate for the diameter of the earth, or maybe the radius, I forget. It doesn't matter. Of all of Christendom, they know of 2 figures who were pretty clearly flat earth figures. These are very minor guys. One of the guys was literally labeled a heretic. In addition, there's 3 other figures who wrote stuff that wasn't clear, but people who study it say they were probably flat earthers. All right. So I'm saying in all of Christendom, in all of early Christianity and medieval Christianity, going up to around 1400, 1500 AD, there are 5 possible flat earthers who are even known. Right? Whereas virtually everyone else was known to be a globe earther. I'm going to give you a few quotes here. We have the historian of science, David Lindbergh, who's now passed away but was considered one of the greatest historians of science from the previous generation. And again, I want to point out, I'm not referring to him as an authority of saying, oh, well, some PhD professor said it. No. It's to point out that even the academics who tend to be strongly anti-Christian, or at least highly secular, agree that the claim that educated people in medieval Europe believed that the earth was flat is a total lie. That medieval Christian scholars said that the earth was flat, that is a total lie. So, quoting historian of science David Lindbergh, he said, "The truth is that the sphericity of the earth was a central feature of theoretical dogma as it came down to the Middle Ages. So central that no amount of contrary theoretical or empirical argumentation could conceivably have dislodged it." He's saying that the medieval Christians were so firmly convinced that the earth was a globe that it would have been virtually impossible to convince them otherwise. Because most of these theologians were familiar with Aristotle and Plato and other Greeks who had established and gave very strong arguments that the earth was a globe. All right. So I'm saying this is the scholarly consensus view, that the monks and the scholastics and the Christian scholars all believed in globe earth. Referencing this guy Cosmos, who was one of the flat earthers, David Lindbergh said, "Cosmos was not particularly influential in Byzantium, but he is important for us because he has been commonly used to buttress the claim that all, or most, medieval people believed they lived on a flat earth. This claim is totally false. Cosmos is, in fact, the only medieval European known to have defended a flat earth cosmology. Whereas it is safe to assume that all educated Western Europeans and almost 100% of educated Byzantines, as well as sailors and travelers, believed in the Earth's sphericity." Okay, so Cosmos is the one guy who very clearly advocated a flat Earth model that is something similar to what the flat earthers advocate today. The one guy, and he was labeled a heretic, and he was ridiculed by the other scholars. All right. Now, I'm not going to go into it here, but notice that he talks about the sailors and the travelers. And it was pointed out to me by a BitChute commenter by the name of Seat Warmer that navigation is completely impossible without belief in the globe Earth, because the way the stars move only makes sense if you're on a globe, right? And so when you, for example, the North Star that's roughly above the North Pole is not visible once you go a little past the equator going south, right? And the flat earthers argue, oh, it's just perspective, it just got small. No. It's the details of how it disappears and moves in the sky. When you go through the mathematics, it has to be on a sphere, right? It doesn't linearly go down like someone who's walking away with a ball over their head. It follows a curve because it rotates away. In 1964, C.S. Lewis wrote, "Physically considered, the Earth is a globe. All the authors of the High Middle Ages are agreed on this. The implications of a spherical Earth were fully grasped." All right. I'm just pointing this out. C.S. Lewis, a Christian, a scholar, but this is in 1964. The Christians were already having to point out the fact that it was a lie that in the in the Middle Ages, Christians believed in a flat Earth. We have Cecile Jane writing in the 1930s, "By the middle of the 15th century, the sphericity of the globe was accepted as a fact by all, or at the very least by almost all educated men throughout the Western Europe. There is no foundation for the assertion, which was once credited, that in Spain a contrary view was maintained by Orthodox theologians and supported by religious prejudice. All right. So I'm just buttressing the point number 2, the myth that in the Middle Ages, Christian scholars believed that the earth was flat. No, there was one, and he was ridiculed. Everyone else, from St. Augustine to Dante, believed in a globe earth. And not only that, but had pretty good numbers for the circumference and the diameter. That gets into point number 3, which I'm not going to belabor here, but it's that the Dark Ages is a lie. The Dark Ages is a lie. The whole claim of the Dark Ages is that there was a war on science by Christendom that held humanity back. And like, oh, we would have had the Industrial Revolution thousands of years ago, but if it wasn't for the Catholic Church. That's like kind of the essence of the Dark Ages claim, and it is totally false. And I'm not a historian. I'm not going to go through the details. I will explore this in future videos. But here's the basic point of view. Between, say, 1500 BC and 500 BC, there was very little scientific and engineering progress. I mean, they had some aqueducts, some nice buildings, some nice statues, okay? Between around 500 and 350 BC, or 300 BC, there were some major advancements by the Greeks. And again, I'm simplifying greatly. By around 200 BC, the Greeks had really fallen out of their golden ages, and the philosophy was degenerate, their engineering was subpar. That's why they were just mopped up by the Romans. By the turn of the millennia, that brief moment of Greek genius had pretty much died out. So that's an important thing to point out, because there was no stopping of progress with the arrival of Christianity. Second of all, at the turn of the millennia, Christianity was not a political force. Christianity did not become a major political force until, 300 to 400 AD. And you could debate those numbers. We could just say 400 AD to make it simple. And what you observe from 400 AD until, say, 14 or 1500 AD is a steady building of civilization. I mean, by 1500 AD, the cities of Europe, the Christian cities of Europe, constituted civilizations which were unrivaled in terms of their hygiene, their economics, their prosperity, their leisure, their levels of literacy, their book production, their scientific endeavors. I mean, this was unrivaled in world history, even at the time of 1500 BC. The idea that Athens was vastly more developed than London in 300 BC Athens was vastly superior to 1300 AD London is totally false. Now, I will admit the Greeks did have some amazing engineering feats at their peak. They were great sailors. They probably had some bigger ships than the English had at that time. They were great artisans. But even if you look at the sculptures, there's really no comparison that the Europeans were outperforming the ancient Greeks in terms of sculptures and art and paintings easily by 1600. All right, and then the rest is history. The Industrial Revolution still happened under Christendom. Isaac Newton was a Christian. And so the whole point is that Christendom really didn't get started saying, let's roughly say 400. Between 400 and 1400 BC, there was It wasn't an amazing time of scientific development, I will grant that. But I'm saying it wasn't particularly slow either. Because you have to realize the one period of scientific development that happened under the ancient Greeks from about 500 to 350 BC, that was an anomaly. That wasn't the norm, right? The normal human pace of scientific development is slow and steady. If you compare medieval Europe with the Greek Golden Age, then yeah, it's not a fair comparison. Because then you would have to compare the Greek Golden Age with the Industrial Revolution in Europe. And obviously there's no comparison. And then that's why the people who want to attack Christendom always fall back on like, oh, well, the cities of Atlantis. Oh, well, this and that. I mean, all this mythical stuff. No, you got to go with the records that we have. Now, here's the fourth point of the 4 amazing facts from my flat earth journey. The fourth point is that the flat earth lie was clearly just propaganda by evolutionists, by Darwinists, who were trying to discredit Christians who were opposing evolution on theological grounds. And I'm not going to go into all the details here. If you're interested, go read the book by Jeffrey Burton Russell called Inventing the Flat Earth. He has an entire chapter dedicated to the evolution of the lie, of the propagandistic lie that Christians had by and large believed in flat earth. And just to summarize, it was an easy way for evolutionists to discredit Christians. They'd say things like, oh, you were the same people who tried to stop Columbus because you guys believed in this crazy flat earth. And then they'd find manuscripts by the one guy who ever said anything about flat earth definitively, this Cosmos guy, and they'd say, see, this is what all Christians believed. And that's really when it emerged, really in that period between 1880 and 1920. And that's a very interesting period because that's when a lot of the central banks were created. That's, including the First World War, some other important wars and conflicts and transfers of power in Europe. I'm not going to get into it, but that's a very pivotal period in the history of Western civilization. That's the time in which women's suffrage became big. A lot of things happened in that time. I'm not going to go into it. It's too much for this video. It's a whole topic. That's a very crucial time period. And as a part of the changes that were happening in that time, people came into power who were not only not Christian, but they were anti-Christian. I just want to repeat that. In that period from 1880 to 1920, during the time when the central banks were formed, leading up to the First World War and including the First World War, that's when people in Europe who had major power were now not only non-Christian, but anti-Christian. And one of the clearest ways to see that is that's when the German writer Friedrich Nietzsche wrote. And right around 1880 is when he published The Antichrist. And if you ever want to read an anti-Christian book, I mean, that book is demonic. And the point about that book, it's not that there weren't, witches and various types of anti-Christians throughout history before then, but he was a German professor who was writing a book virtually declaring himself to be an antichrist and putting forth an intellectual framework that would become largely accepted within the Western world as the as basically the framework of viewing things as a power struggle and being part of a power struggle instead of being part of Christendom. All right, he was the guy who first really opened the door for that, and he wrote the book, The Antichrist. And my point isn't about the details of that book. It's just to point out that this book was by and large accepted. It wasn't like this book was burned. It wasn't like this book was condemned. It wasn't like this was a secret manuscript. It wasn't like there were underground printings of this book. Like, for example, when William Tyndale translated the Bible, it had to be smuggled into England because he was on the continent when he translated it and printed it in English, and they had to hide it in shipping containers and smuggle it into England. All right. It wasn't like that happened with Friedrich Nietzsche's The Antichrist. I mean, they just printed it, and people were like, oh, this is interesting. Right. And I laugh just because it's ridiculous. That's how much the European elite had become anti-Christian by the 1880s, that the Antichrist was not received with any revolt or protest or anything. I mean, it was just like, oh, that Nietzsche guy, yeah, he's kind of weird. Some people did ridicule it, and today that's regarded as a classic in secular schools of philosophy, etc., which I think is ridiculous because the book is actually deeply spiritual in nature. It's just of demonic spirits, not of the Spirit of Christ or the Holy Spirit. That's a whole separate topic. But I'm just pointing out, and again, you have to read the book Inventing the Flat Earth by Jeffrey Burton Russell to go into the details where he documents the specific people who were evolutionists and who were clearly, either non-Christians or anti-Christians, or people who were pretending to be Christians and promoting this thing of like, oh, well, now Christianity has to take a back seat. Now it's time for science. Now it's time for evolution. Science is the new gospel. So that's really where scientism comes from in terms of the time window, the time frame, around 1880 to 1920. And it corresponds with a dramatic reformation of European power and even power in the United States through the banks. So I'm going to leave it at that. I just want to point out that it's been 100% documented that flat Earth was a lie invented by Darwinist, pro-Darwin evolutionists who were trying to frame Christians as simpleton flat earthers. They just made it up. It's just a lie. These people were interested in power. These people were interested in becoming the new priest class. It was about professors and quote-unquote scientists becoming the new priest class. And so they just made something up. And it really stuck. That's the whole thing, is that it stuck, and this attack on Christianity through science, or science falsely so called, if you will, has been very effective, frankly. And so they've never let up. They haven't relented on that line of attack, and they've just doubled down on this flat earth lie. And they've doubled down on it so much that now there's Americans who believe the lie. And they say, oh, well, Christians have always believed this, and so it must be true. And so the lie is the globe. No. You got it totally backwards. These people have been pushing this lie so hard that Christians have always believed in a flat earth since 1880, and it's become so institutionalized that there are Christians who now believe that the flat earth is part of Christendom, is part of Christian history, when nothing could be further from the truth. All right, guys, so I'm going to leave it at there. There's a lot to dig into on this subject, and I'm going to have to unpack it because I don't want this video to be hours long. But I do want to do a deep dive on who some of these Christian scholars were, because frankly I learned a lot investigating the lives and the accomplishments of these Christian scholars who were globe earthers. But we'll have to leave that for a future video. Take care, guys. God bless.